Hey, good morning, everybody. So glad to be back on this Saturday morning. And my name is Ed Samuel. I'm a career coach with a firm called Sam Nova. We're based in Kennett Square, PA, and serve clients in the greater Philadelphia area and across the U.S. This morning, we're going to talk about one of the most common frustrations and complaints I receive as a career coach by many of my clients, people I meet in transition, which are hundreds and hundreds of people every year. And even those who are working and applying for a job, all of which say that, hey, I went to this interview, I talked to somebody on the phone, I did my very best, then all of a sudden, kaboom, everything goes silent. There's no communication back from the employer, from the recruiter, not from anybody. And people are scratching their heads saying, hey, what the heck is going on? I got all dressed up. I went in, I gave it my best shot. I talked to people or I talked to somebody on the phone. And, there's an expectation that, I'd hear something back. Now, here's my disclaimer, though. This happens a lot, but not all recruiting firms, not all employers do it. But as a rule, many won't get back to you. And I'm talking about big name companies you hear about all the time, especially in the Philadelphia area. Sometimes it's big name headhunters. Sometimes it's a small business owner, but it's really across the board. All industries, all levels. You go to an interview and you don't hear anything back, and it could be a phone screen. It could be a 20-minute phone screen. Okay, we'll let you know. It could be a 30-minute, an hour interview on the phone. Hey, we'll let you know. It could be a video conference room. Hey, we'll get back to you. It could be a face-to-face interview. It could be a second-round interview, a final interview. Hey, you come in, we're down to 2 people, and then you don't hear anything back. It can happen with third-party recruiters. I don't care if they're contingency recruiters, retained recruiters, consulting recruiters. You go to an interview and then you don't hear anything back. And, if it's the employers, then, it's the internal recruiters. And in really small firms, it could be the owner of the company themselves. They interviewed you, they found you, they interviewed you, and next thing you know, the owner of the company won't even call you back. So it really happens across just about every type of industry, any size company. There's this concept that says, hey, if you came in for an interview, I'm in control, and I really don't owe you anything, even after you came in for an interview. And so that's what we're going to talk about. And sometimes, all you're looking for, all any of us are looking for, hey, are we going to hear back in a few days? Could it be a week, 2 weeks? A month, 2 months, just give me anything, but to not communicate at all. I really believe it's a total disrespect, action by that employer or recruiter. You're being disrespected in a way that, you just can't, that's the best word I can describe. Now, when you go in for an interview or you talk to a recruiter on the phone, again, I don't care what scenario it might be, why do they not call you back? And I think it's worth spending a few minutes going over some of those reasons. Now, if it's an employer, they have internal recruiters, somebody in HR, they're trying to do their best. And if you recall, last year, I did a program on September 1st, 2018, and I called it The World of Internal Recruiters and what they're up against day in, day out. So you might want to go back and listen to that at 1180 WFYL. Take a look at the podcast there on 9/118. But let me share with you some highlights on possibly why, and I'm not making excuses for anybody. I'm just explaining why, you go for an interview and you don't hear anything back. So one big reason, and I talked about this again last year in my program, is HR departments get squeezed. And I mean squeezed from a spending standpoint. And they might ask one recruiter to fill 40 plus unique professional roles when the industry standard is more like 8 to 12 roles. They're trying to fill 40. So no fault of the internal recruiter. It's just the simple, fact that they can't even take a breath. It's a failing model because you you just don't have the time to not even get back to the people who are not in contention even after an interview. And the only people you focus on, these people will focus on the people who are going to get the job, where they're going to make him or her a job offer. And 3 or 4 other people may have interviewed for the role and they just dropped the ball because they're out of time. It's such a failing model. Most companies don't realize, whether it's the HR leadership or even the people that run the company from a profitability standpoint, that the cost of not fulfilling roles is completely outdistances anything that they might be saving by keeping the recruiters so overworked. But that's one reason a recruiter might not call you back or communicate. Now, another reason, this seems so simple, but it happens a lot. And I worked with a really large company, a well-known company in Philadelphia that everybody knows. And I had candidates go in to interview, clients of mine go in to interview, and next thing you know, you hear nothing back. And we asked the internal recruiter, hey, what's going on? And their answer is, I don't hear anything back from the hiring manager. I can't even get in touch with the hiring manager. And I've been trying for days, weeks, a month, and the hiring managers just stopped communicating with me. So every once in a while, you have firms where the internal recruiters are doing everything they can to try to get to the hiring manager. Now, my fault with this is that the internal recruiter needs to go to their boss, and they need to get HR leadership involved to push the envelope on these hiring managers who had this urgent need to interview you, but yet all of a sudden everything goes cold and there's no communication. Just doesn't make sense, but that happens a lot. Here's another reason. Another reason is you went in for an interview, you got dressed up, everything's going well, but you went in, and quite honestly, this is a bit unethical, but it happens a lot. You were plan B the entire time. They had no plan on hiring you because they were going to hire internally. And you came in as just as a kind of a point off the curb just to see, are the people internally that we're going to hire, are they going to be good people or not? And then there's, less of an urgency to get back to you or communicate in any way. And you might be the best qualified candidate as well, ironically, but they're going to hire internal anyway. So it's really convenient for a company to not get back to you, because any conversation, they'd catch themselves in a half lie if that was the way they were operating. Another reason that happens is that, hey, everything just is delayed. They slow down hiring. A big company going through a merger right now, they just put all hiring on hold for the next month until the merger activity gets resolved. But is the HR department going back and talking to every single person that went in and interviewed in the last 2 or 3 weeks that everything is in delay mode? Chances are they're not, but if they do, that would certainly be a good thing, and maybe even an exception on the rule. The other thing that happens too is that this sounds so simple, but people go in for an interview, they talk to the hiring manager, HR is not around, internal recruiter's not around, but the companies, they don't put any process in place. So you think it's so logical. Hey, I interviewed with the hiring manager, and then the hiring manager is supposed to let the HR person know, and the HR person is supposed to give you an update a week later, a few days later, and that never happens because they simply don't have a process in place, and that happens a lot. Now, here's one of the bigger reasons that people don't like to communicate with you. And I've seen this as a recruiter. I've seen this time and time again. What happens is that you go in for an interview, and it could be a second round interview, and things go really well. Next thing you know, everything goes silent. No one's talking to you. And that's because they went with the other candidate. They went with the other candidate. And what they need to do now is they have to maybe bring the other candidate back in for another interview. That could take 1 or 2 weeks, maybe 3. Hey, they decide to make a job offer. That could take another 1 to 2 weeks. Hey, we want to make sure they clear the background check. That could take another couple of weeks. Now what's happening is a month and a half, 2 months have gone by because they're chasing the candidate that they really want. They're not going to communicate anything to you. And I can tell you one of the reasons they don't want to communicate is because it's bad news. And they really don't want to get into a discussion with you about it other than, but the other fact of the matter is they don't want to communicate with you is because what happens if the person doesn't clear the background check? What happens if they don't accept the job offer? Then they could come back to you in a month and a half later and say, hey, are you still interested in this role? We'd like to move forward with your candidacy. And then you're sitting there scratching your head saying, wait a minute now, how come it took a month and a half to get back to me? Well, unfortunately, that fear factor is that's alive and well out there. Telling you the truth might create conflict. It will create conflict. I was a recruiter. I know all about this conflict because when you tell people the truth, some people can't handle it. Hey, we went with another candidate that's better qualified. And then they start arguing with you. So a great way to avoid all this, don't communicate with the candidate. Those are things that happen in real life. And, here's another factor. Another factor is some companies, they don't rush at all. Some companies almost pride themselves. They stand up on a hill and beat their chest about how we're going to take 1, 2, 3 months. Our process is very long, very drawn out. A little goofy to me, but there are firms that, they're in no rush to hire anybody. And in spite of what it's costing the business month after month after month with the position being unfilled, but at least some of those firms will tell you that, and then you almost know to expect it. But in many cases, it's a long, drawn-out process that you can expect, and that's one reason another reason why you're not hearing anything back. Now, here's another reason that happened last year. It happens usually once a year. For me is that, I'm working with the client. Hey, I haven't heard back from the recruiter. So we go push the envelope. We push, and we find out, well, the reason you didn't hear back from the recruiter is because the recruiter got fired. The recruiter quit. And that recruiter could have worked for a retained search firm, contingency firm, or it could be an internal recruiter in-house. They just quit or they got fired. The next thing you know, if you're waiting around for a communication, you're never going to get one. And many times when people quit or they get fired, there's no good transition plan taking place between those candidates that were being interviewed and a new person being thrown into the mix. So I'm just trying to give you a sense of, employers, companies don't get back to you. These are some of the reasons they don't get back to you. But in spite of all of that, you could still do some things when you hear nothing back because it's just not right. At every level, when you don't hear back something. And all we're looking for is something. We're not looking for a yes, no, but, we're just give me some kind of update. So let me give you a real life example that just happened in the month of May. I had a friend of mine call up and kind of explain a scenario. And this is the scenario. Hey, Ed, I applied for this job in Pennsylvania with an employer. It was a great job. It's a great, solid fit. Got a call from the HR coordinator, and maybe they acted like an internal recruiter to set up the interview. So there's a face-to-face interview, and this was back on May 10th. It was with the hiring manager. Everything went great. And they said, hey, we're going to do a follow-up meeting in a few days with my boss. So everything was good. And then what happened was there was a second interview. Happened on 5/15. Again, the hiring manager there, their boss was there. Everything was going really well. Hey, next step would be maybe a third round interview with some more people. Now, at the end of the interview, this person was told, my friend was told, hey, this happened on a Wednesday. We're going to let you know by the end of the week. That would be Friday. Guess what? Friday comes, Friday goes, no communication. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Finally, he doesn't know what to do. And I said, well, here's what you do. Send an email to the hiring manager. You interviewed with the hiring manager. They're the ones that made the commitment you would hear something by Friday. Now we're into the following Wednesday. Send an email. So that's what he did. He sent an email to the hiring manager. I said, great. Okay, next, on Monday, if you don't hear back, call up the hiring manager and leave a voicemail for the hiring manager. And that's exactly what they did. Now, We wait. Another day, another week, nothing. This type of thing, happens all the time, and it feels like a slap in the face, especially when the hiring manager tells you they're going to get back to you. So what else can you possibly do in this scenario? Well, here's some things that you can do. Any one of you can do when this starts to happen as part of, once you've gone through an interview. And again, it could be a phone interview. It could be a face-to-face interview. Pick up the phone, make one more phone call to the hiring manager, leave a second voicemail, wait a few days. Now, if the hiring manager's boss was actually in the interview and you interviewed with him or her, send an email to the hiring manager, pick up the phone and call the hiring manager's boss. Because you've already given the hiring managers an opportunity to get back to you. They haven't. Well, call the hiring manager's boss, leave a voicemail if needed. Wait a couple of days. Now, you can always go back to the HR coordinator, the internal recruiter who scheduled the interview and say, hey, any update? Send an email, call, leave a voicemail. You're just, you're trying to get some type of feedback. I'd also refrain from sending any kind of LinkedIn messages. This should all be done via formal email and phone call. Well, then what happens next? What happens if, nothing happens then? The disrespect to you just grows. Whether no matter if it's an error or not an error, doesn't really matter. You're being disrespected. Well, now, and all you're looking for, am I a no-go? Is it a maybe? Hey, am I still in contention? Great. Has everything been delayed? Are we in hold mode? Are we days away, weeks away, months away? All you're looking for is any type of communication to give you kind of a data point. It's not that hard. It really isn't that hard unless people get so ratcheted into the fear factor. But certainly if you sent an email, then you don't even have to talk to, they don't even have to talk to you. Then it's just an email, but at least it's some type of an update. But what else can you do? Well, some people decide to do nothing. Literally, I've talked to people. Well, I guess they don't want to move forward and they just move on. I generally don't like that approach. I like to hold people accountable because they're holding you accountable during that interview. And all you're trying to do is close the loop. Well, some people say, well, I don't want to burn bridges. Well, yep, that is true. But I would ask you a question. For a company that's disrespecting you that much, why would you want to go work for that company in the end if they can't close the loop with you during an interview? If the hiring manager doesn't have the decency to call you back after 2 emails, a voicemail, 2 voicemails, why would you want to go work for that person anyway? So there are factors that you have to be thinking about. I'm not asking anybody to be disrespectful. I'm just asking people to be professionally persistent. So what else could you do? If the company's large enough and the internal recruiter's not getting back to you, go to the director of recruiting, the vice president of recruiting, the head of recruiting. Lay out what you've done, the communications that you've done, and then leave them a voicemail. After 3 days, you could go to the head of HR at that point. Whether it's a director, vice president, do the same thing. Lay out a scenario. This is who I've talked to. Send an email, send a voicemail. After 3 days, you don't hear anything, then go to the president of the company, send them a letter, call them, leave a message, talk to his or her admin assistant. You'd be surprised at what happens when you start working at the VP of HR and the presidential levels. And you know what? If you're going to give somebody a bad hair day, so be it, because they've disrespected you in the process. You went in for an interview. You deserve, and it's expected that you get some type of update. That's all you're asking for. And during this whole process, this is going to take an employer or a recruiter just a couple of minutes of their time just to give you that update. But you're showing also a level of tenacity. You're showing a level of professional persistence that I promise you most people won't do. And perhaps that gets somebody's attention, not on a negative basis, but on a positive basis. This is just one of those things where, just don't give up if you're being disrespected. And if you're working with a third-party recruiting firm, it's just a little bit different. The headhunter doesn't get back to you. Hey, after, a one email, maybe a few days you call up, leave a voicemail. Maybe a few days you leave another email. Maybe one more voicemail. But, after a couple of weeks with a third-party retained headhunter, at that point, go to the managing partner at that headhunting firm and say, I want to talk to the managing partner. Send them an email, send them a voicemail. Most of the times when you do that, they'll get back to you with some kind of an answer. On several occasions when I've had clients of mine go push that, guess what happened? They had fired the headhunter at the firm. And that's why you're not getting any feedback. And then somebody else is on the ball, and yes, and sure enough, you're still in contention, but things have been delayed. Now this whole approach of pushing people for an answer, just remember, it's here's the other side of this. The other side of this, when you do push people for an answer, whatever that answer may be, but if the answer is, hey, you're no longer being looked at as a candidate, we have other people have a stronger background that we're going to go with, then you have to kind of accept that answer. You can't go in kind of this argumentative mode. And if they give you some specific feedback, which every once in a while they will, you can't hold the recruiter accountable, and you don't want to make this a combative process, because then you will burn bridges. You have to take a deep breath and say, hey, thanks for the update. That's all I was looking for. And then you have to move on. As a recruiter, when I did this for many years, I tried to give my clients, my candidates, the truth all the time. And I could tell you most of the time they weren't happy, right? Most of the time they were not happy. But I could tell you almost 100% they respected me because I did tell them the truth of what was happening. Some of the really good internal recruiters and some of the really good recruiting firms, they create a policy that says, okay, every Friday, not only will my clients hear from me or my internal hiring managers hear from me, but all my active candidates who are actively interviewing will hear from me. And for those that do that, they communicate well. Most don't do that, unfortunately, and that's when you have to pick up the mantle. But my point is, be very careful that if you push people, they might give you an answer, and the answer may not be the one you want to hear. Now, one thing that you can do to help the cause greatly when you're interviewing is at the end of an interview, no matter what happens, never end an interview, ever, without you saying, what are the next steps? And what's the timing of those next steps? Make sure those words are uttered by you to the person you're interviewing with, so there's an expectation created in terms of when you need to follow up and when you don't need to follow up. Because sometimes interviews end and, okay, thank you for coming in, we'll be in touch. That's almost like saying nothing, because what does that mean? In touch in 3 months, in touch in 3 days, maybe we'll never see you or talk to you again. What does that mean? Ask specifically, what are the next steps and the timing of those next steps? And then you can figure out what part of this you want to implement that I've been talking about this morning. So as we wrap up here, here's some takeaways that I hope you've garnered from this morning. Ask the question at the end of the interview, what are the next steps and the timing of those next steps? And then you take action accordingly. Remember, there's many reasons why after an interview you may not get a phone call. Don't be surprised if they don't communicate, because I've walked through at least 8 different reasons why it can tend to happen. But number 3, focus on your self-respect. Don't be disrespected by anybody, not by an employer, not by a recruiter. Close the communication loop, hold them accountable, and be professionally persistent about it. I'm saying you do send an email, you wait a couple of days, call, wait 2 or 3 days, send an email, couple of days, call, and then escalate it. And that's, point number 4, escalate. Continue to escalate and go right up to the president if that's what you have to do. And just keep a history of what you're asking for and be very professional about it. I'm just looking for an update. And maybe if we all do enough of this frequently, companies will actually put something in place to ensure that people who are actively interviewing get a follow-up phone call, get communicated in some way. And then based on how you're being treated, this is number 5 in wrap up. Based on how you're being treated, you need to then make a judgment call. If this is the type of recruiting firm you want to continue to work with, is this the type of employer you want to work with ever, let alone the hiring manager, let alone, the firm itself? If they treat you this way, how do they treat their internal employees? That's the big question mark that you have to ask yourself. So this whole issue has other implications other than you possibly not getting the job. It could be, this is a reflection of who this company is and how they operate. Many other recruiting firms out there to work with, many employers to go work for. So we're just about out of time. Please join us again on our next Optimize Your Career program on Saturday, April 20th. Our next topic will be, what kind of career fire protector do you have in place, especially if you're working and everything is going great? What kind of career fire protector do you have in place? I think you'll find it very interesting discussion. This is Ed Samuel, career coach with Sam Nova. Our website is www.samnovainc.com, samnovainc.com. If you'd like to reach me with a question or a comment, email me at esamuel@samnovainc.com or call our main number at 610-274-8214. Again, that's 610-274-8214. Make it a great weekend. So long for now, and God bless.